Alright, so I'm back. Again, I've got a terrible, this external hard drive is terrible, and like you touch it a tiny bit and suddenly the connection gets lost. I gotta buy a new one. Anyway, going back here, you can't blame the police. Peter Moskos, an associate professor in the Department of Law and Police Science at John Jay College of, and what was the other one called? Friar, that was the thing. John Jay College of Criminal Justice is author of Cop in the Hood and In Defense of Flogging. Much, though by no means all, of the disproportionate rate of blacks stopped, frisked, arrested, convicted, and imprisoned is a simple reflection of violence in poor African American communities. Like robbing banks because that's where the money is, the obvious reason police focus so much of their attention on the young male black community is because that's where the murders are. It's not politically correct to say so, but reality isn't politically correct. Over 90% of New York City's 536 murder victims last year were black or Hispanic. Just 48 victims were white or Asian. The rate of white homicide in the city, 1.18 per 100,000, is incredibly low even by international standards. It's still like three times in Switzerland. The Hispanic rate of homicide in New York City is barely above the overall national average, 4.8, and yet the black homicide rate remains stubbornly high, 17.2, 15 times higher than the white rate. Blacks are one quarter of the city's population and two-thirds of murder victims. Black men aged 15 to 29 represent less than 3% of the city's population, but account for one-third of those murders. Race is not a cause of violent crime, but it does serve as an effective proxy measure for the social and environmental factors that contribute to violence. In New York City, whites are more than twice as likely as blacks to have a four-year college degree, 48% versus 20%. Unemployment and poverty rates are twice as high among blacks. Not only is white per capita income much higher than black income, but, whoa, 45,000 versus 18,000, but black income is disturbingly, almost unlivably low. And what do we do? Blame the police. Yeah, but again, so what we need, again, is to have a basic income. I, again, propose a basic income of 10,000 US dollars, which is like, it's like more than half of just, like, apparently I don't know if this is like mean or median income, but yeah, mean, I guess. So the median is even lower. Police do indeed need to work with greater sensitivity and discretion in minority communities, and police should be faulted for ineffective tactics such as misdemeanor marijuana arrests and non-discretionary stop and frisk tactics that cast too wide a net. Let us not forget the 99.98% of black people who are not murderers. But we also need to applaud and reward police officers, and the NYPD in particular, for doing their job in preventing crime and violence. Ideally, we'd end the war on drugs, the greatest cause of racial disparity in the criminal justice system. But until we do, we need more police and smarter policing, not a knee-jerk politically correct response. Yeah, again, gotta you basic income plus legalization of drugs. That solves your issues. And restriction of gun purchase to people who have don't allow purchase of guns for people who obviously have a record of misusing them, and require, of course, that there be a training, a certain amount of training, just like a driver's license. Well, you have a training to buy a gun, and so to have a gun license, and you need a gun license to buy a gun, and you'd ban also like automatic weapons. Already, there are worrisome signs of an increase in violent crime. Last year, New York City murders of African Americans increased 31%, while white murders declined another 27%. Yeah. Let's see what else I've got to say about this. Um, yeah. I don't know. I don't know. Sort of have a hard time. Must include Moscow's. I don't know. Mm. Let's see what they're saying here. I know I should probably edit this, but in any case, like nobody's watching this, so I don't care. I'm not gonna edit this. Like I should have edited together the two segments of the video, but like I don't care. Too bad. Uh, the idea that if we just stop arresting, prosecuting nonviolent offenders and everything will get better is a dream world. We haven't seen that happen anywhere. Yeah, yeah. I think it's too. I think it's easy to just like blame the police when there is still lots of violence that is not caused by the police. So what has to be addressed, I think, more importantly than the police brutality, and particular police brutality against black people. I mean, already more important than specific black targeted police brutality is just police a tendency to be a bit too heavy-handed overall. Uh, Not just a bit, but very much so. But also that the reason that the police are like that is because there is also more violent crime in the United States, and so that has to be addressed with again the policies I've said: basic income, uh, legalization of drugs, and finally the limitation of access to guns. So again, uh, they Republicans claim to be tough on crime, but no, they do everything they can to increase the causes of crime. Okay, and then they want to fix it by putting a band-aid by increasing tough policing. But if you want to limit crime, that's actually what you want to do. So like the Republicans are pro-crime. Just keep that in mind. If you like crime, you should vote Republican.
A deadly force lab study from Washington State University in the last couple of years found that participants were biased in favor of black suspects, not against them, in favor of them in simulated threat scenarios. In 2015, the DOJ analyzed the Philadelphia Police Department. They found that white officers were less likely than black or Hispanic officers to shoot unarmed black suspects.
Okay, I'm gonna actually undownvote this because he's actually making lots of good points. I I just hate the title. I just completely hate this title. But but
A widely
yeah.
publicized survey that just came out, a study that just came out from Harvard professor Roland Fryer in July 2016, surveyed over
Oh,
1,000
oh yeah. So he's mentioning the study I saw there. Yeah. So remember that Fryer and Moscow's.
police shootings and found that black suspects are shot significantly less often than white suspects in comparable situations. Fryer, for what it's worth, is black. In 2015, the cops shot 987 people. A huge majority of those people were armed or threatening deadly force. Blacks represented 26% of the people who were shot, even though blacks represent in the United States nearly 50% of all murder suspects. Police officers are 18.5 times more likely to be shot by a black male than an unarmed black male is likely to be killed by police.
18.5, really? Yeah, see that's the kind of statistics that these sort of Black Lives Matters people don't mention. And that is also why these police people are shooting so much, is that they're literally scared for their own lives. That's something that we have to remember.
Okay, how about the white privilege of stop and frisk? You hear this one all the time, right? There's white privilege that tends to stop and frisk, driving while black. In New York City, minorities keep running into cops because minorities keep committing an outsized share of crimes. The stop
Yeah.
and frisk fiasco in New York City, where Bill de Blasio, the moron mayor, thinks stop and frisk is evidence of racism. From January to June 2008, 90
Yeah, I'm glad, cause sometimes that I think I'm being too harsh on these these people I don't like, and by just sort of calling them sort of nasty names. But like if he's allowing himself to say like moron and stuff, I think I'm not at a lower level than him. At least I'm being sort of equivalent.
8%, 98% of all gun assailants in New York City were Hispanic or black. Stop and frisk in that city statistically under-targeted minorities. Only 85% of the people stopped and frisked were Hispanic or black. If there's white privilege, if there is, it's in over-policing white communities. Black communities don't need fewer cops, they need more cops to stop the crime. That's exactly what Black Lives Matter will never allow, and more black people will die because of it. How about pulling people?
That is a very good point. That is a very good point. Again, like I support the idea, of course, of not uh racially discriminating against black people. But like those studies indicate that there isn't. Other studies indicate that there is, but the again the if there are even like serious studies that indicate that there isn't discrimination, and I mean there's multiple studies, there's like multiple evidence that there actually isn't that much police discrimination against black people. Well, in that case, then that is not the actual issue. Then the issue is more that there are more black people who end up in situations of criminality. And even that is not the issue. The issue is more that there are people at all that end up in being criminals. And again, so that brings me again to the issue of just in a completely racially blind fashion, do take the necessary, very simple measures, implement those very simple measures to reduce criminality.
Over for speeding, driving while black. The DOJ and the New Jersey Attorney General commissioned a study in the 1990s after the DOJ accused the New Jersey Highway Patrol of being biased against black folks. And what they found is that black people sped disproportionately. Blacks were 25% of all speeders. They were pulled over 23% of the time. How about sentencing disparities? You hear this one a lot too, and the one that people normally cite is the disparity between crack cocaine sentencing and powder cocaine sentencing. The idea being white people do powder and black people do crack, and therefore black people who go to prison for longer sentences because of crack, that's racism in the criminal justice system. This neglects a few things. One, crack is more addictive than powder cocaine. Two, it's easier to distribute than powder cocaine. Three, the lead sponsor of all of the legislation with regard to crack cocaine and increased sentencing in the 1980s were black legislators from the inner cities who are sick of watching their cities become prey to the crack epidemic. If you want to compare white and black drug crime laws, then why not use solid substances like crystal meth? 80% of the people arrested for crystal meth charges are white. The sentences for crystal meth per ounce are exactly the same, identical to those for crack cocaine. By the way, the idea that the jails are filled with black and Hispanic people because of the war on drugs, it's not true. Just 16% of state prisoners were convicted for drug offenses. Most of the drug offenses involve distribution. Only 3.6% of state prisoners are in for simple drug possession, and that's typically not a guy in his dorm room smoking a bong. That's typically some guy who's out distributing and then pled down to a simple drug possession charge and ended up in jail. But all of this is white privilege. You can't explain any of these disparities with simple logic like I just did or with facts like I just did. It's all white privilege. It's just out there. It's the evil white guy. You can't point to the evil white guy, but it's the evil white guy. When Baltimore, when it riots, and it's largely black and has a majority minority police force, and a black police chief, and a black mayor, and a black city council, and a black president, and a black attorney general, when it burns itself up because a black guy gets killed by several police officers, several of whom are black, that's white privilege. And if we're going to be fair about privilege, if we're going to talk about the people who are really privileged in the United States, perhaps we ought to start with the Asians, the nefarious Asians, right? Because the fact is that the evil, terrible Asians have been schlonging us all, as Donald Trump might put it. Asians do better on standardized tests. They have to do better on standardized tests in order to get into college. A Princeton University study from a few years ago showed that blacks receive a bonus of 230 points on the SATs. This is back in the days when it was out of 1,600. Versus their competitors, Asians received a penalty of 50 points.
Oh, really? Really? Wow.
And they deserve it, right? I mean, they really do. I mean, we really know that the founding Asians just created the documents and created the system specifically to just destroy the rest of us, which is why the Constitution is written in Korean. Now, as you might notice in all of this, accusing a racial group of privilege without evidence sounds an awful lot like horrible racism. But that's what the left constantly does. Fact-based perspectives, good decisions, these are not a privilege. These are decisions. And the impact of the...
Yeah, I used to kind of, just have sort of pretty simple idea of this, these quotas and affirmative action stuff, like racial quotas. And now, thinking about it, it just seems completely ridiculous to me. And yeah, I mean, until a few years ago, I just hadn't really given the issue much thought. And I thought, oh yeah, well, that sounds nice, to like, fix the disparities, between the races and stuff. And now I realize it's perpetuating racialism, and as such, it's more Nazi mindsets, yeah.
Those decisions is predictable. When someone asks you to check your privilege, you should ask them to check their character. More likely than not, it is missing. White privilege is a way to divide, it's a way to silence. We can all agree discrimination is terrible. We can all stand together when a black person is wrongly shot by the police. But to attribute that shooting to unspecified white privilege and then state that America itself is racist, as Colin Kaepernick has done, is racist in and of itself. You can't assume that white people don't care about innocent black people getting shot without evidence. That is disgusting, and that is racist. Okay, let's move on to trigger warnings. And trigger warnings exist because if you can't achieve equality of outcome, and the left is focused very much on equality of outcome, then instead you want to focus on equality of feelings. We have to feel good about ourselves. Yay. Now, spoiler alert, I'm not big on feelings. If you're not a direct member of my family,
Yeah. Um, the thing is that on this stuff, I basically agree with Ben more than I disagree with him. The problem is that on other issues, he is like wrong, just like factually wrong. So that is kind of the issue here. I'll have to see. I don't know. Maybe I sort of forgotten what he said or something. And actually, he's right. Like who knows? But I'm pretty sure. In any case, he's like focusing on certain things and and kind of misrepresent. Well, he's just being very biased in favor of Republicans and right-wing ideology. So I mean, he's right in pointing out the flaws of the left, but the problem is that he's completely blind to the flaws of the right. It's like all these people. That's what they're like.
then I frankly couldn't care less, and I don't think that you have to care about anybody else's feelings per se. I think facts are more important than feelings, of course. Trigger warnings reflect precisely the opposite point of view. A trigger warning says that if everybody has to feel equal, that means we have to warn people about things that are said that might offend them. We have to warn you that we're going to chat about politics. I have to warn you before I make this speech so that you don't spontaneously combust like a character in a Dickens novel. We wouldn't want anybody to be triggered, because if people are triggered, then somehow they'll never recover from this strain and this shock and this stress. I mean, it's just like the members of the military who have to serve in Iraq and Afghanistan. I know that every time I meet a member of the military, the first thing that I do is I have to give them a bunch of trigger warnings because of all the suffering that's going to happen if I say things that are basically factual. It seems to me that if members of the military can deal with actually being shot at without trigger warnings, you should be able to deal with basic political speak without somebody warning you beforehand. The important point about trigger warnings, the basic notion of trigger warnings, is that nothing subjectively offensive must occur. Nothing subjective. It's not that it's objectively offensive, it's subjectively offensive. If you find it offensive, we have to give you a trigger warning beforehand. We have to tiptoe around you. We have to bend reality to fit you. Your perception of yourself is more important than objective reality. So, for example, if you're like me and you believe in basic human biology and you believe that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, but a man thinks he's a woman, the left says that you cannot, under any circumstances, certainly not without a trigger warning, say that a man is a man if he thinks he's a woman, right? Because otherwise you'll have triggered them and then something terrible will happen. And whenever the left says something terrible will happen, it's sort of like when you warn a small child that they're going to get in trouble, and the child is afraid of trouble, and they have no idea what trouble is. I don't know what the terrible thing that happens is if people are triggered. Does the world end? Do we all die? Does an asteroid hit us? Or are they just a little offended, and then they wake up the next morning and they go do something useful with their life? So you issue the trigger, and the trigger warnings basically have to be issued for the third term of the fourth term of stupid art, which is microaggressions. So I know everybody's very into these microaggressions these days. Everybody's very concerned about microaggressions. These, of course, are little terms, little things that we say that may offend you, even if we don't mean to offend you. So intent is not necessary in order for a microaggression to have occurred. We have a strict liability standard. If someone is offended, you have microaggressed them. I hate the term microaggressions, not only because it's a foolish idea, but also because the term itself has embedded within it the idea that if I say something that offends you, it's not just something that offends you, it is an aggression. And aggression is to be met by aggression. Right? If I microaggress you, you get to punch me because I've microaggressed you now. You get to be aggressive in return. It's elevating verbiage to the level of violence, which, by the way, is what
I'm not sure people are saying that you get to punch someone who's committed a microaggression.
we would call colloquially the end of civilization. Civilization is about the idea that we get to say things without being met with violence. But microaggressions reject that notion. Microaggressions.
I think again, he's kind of exaggerating the idea. I mean, I get what he means. And he's to some limited extent he's right. He's exaggerating because like I don't think we expect that one is allowed to punch someone for committing a microaggression.
Microaggressions are an excuse for the fascist boot to come down and squash you. The word, as I say, and microaggressions, I mean, you all know this because you go to Yale, but if you're watching this online, you don't know what a microaggression is. If you use terms like he and she instead of words that don't exist that we're currently making up in a back room somewhere here.
Well, again, I actually prefer gender neutral words. So I mean, but I am not particularly a fan of these sort of new sort of funny pronouns. So I like to just say it. It. Like in Chinese it's just like ta, you know. You just um they're for male and female, third person. Singular.
This is a microaggression. People have to be able to pick their own pronouns. Which, I mean, honestly, it sounds like a lot of fun to me. I've been watching a lot of Game of Thrones, so I prefer that all of you address me as Your Grace from here on in. If you say he and she, that's a microaggression.
That actually is pretty pertinent, and I agree with that. That's a pretty valid comment. I mean, you could basically ask that anyone could, you could ask to be called anything. Your Highness. My pronoun is Your Highness. Is one word. It's like one word that's a pronoun. It's like, and that's Your Highness. Your high, wonderful, I don't even know, some sort of pompous term.
If you say things like, where are you from? That's a microaggression, which kills half of the pickup lines ever uttered. Right? If you say I'm colorblind, that's a microaggression because no one is colorblind. So if you say you hate racism, that's a microaggression because we're all racist. But if you say you're a racist, that's a macroaggression because you're not allowed to be racist. So good luck.
Yeah, he's kind of. I'm afraid he's kind of.
Commonality among all of these is that people find them offensive subjectively, not objectively. And then because you're mad, you get to reach out and hit somebody. And the way that you can tell this, when I spoke at Cal State LA, there was a professor who didn't like that I was there, and so he wrote on his door, he put up a whiteboard, and he wrote on there, the only real answer to microaggressions is macroaggressions. And unfortunately, this has bled up into...
Yeah, if people are actually saying that, I gotta agree that is a problem. That is a problem.
Into the kind of leftist ether all throughout the United States, and we see it all the time. My favorite story about this is, of course, the CNN headline news story. How many of you...
Wait, so what? I'm just trying to think of what was the common... It's like, I guess the common theme to these things is like, what do you call it? Like identity politics or something. Is that like the term for this sort of the common... Yeah. Theme for all
have ever
these
watched
issues.
CNN headline news? This is a well-educated crowd. I would assume some. Show of hands. How many people have watched CNN headline news? Okay, that's the entire viewership of CNN headline news. Okay, so I was asked to go on CNN headline news. This would have been sometime last year. This is right around the time when Caitlyn Jenner was about to get the Hero of the Century Award from ESPN for the great heroic act of invading Normandy. No, I'm sorry. I mean for the great heroic act of having a couple of gender surgeries and some hormone treatment and being mentally ill. So they asked me to come on the...
I don't like calling that a mental illness, I like if you that's just how you want to be, that's not I disagree with that characterization. See, that's where we differ.
They asked me to come on CNN headline news to discuss this because I'm the only conservative in a 30-mile radius of the CNN studios in LA. It's actually in the white pages. It just says conservative and there's my name. I'm the only one. So they asked me, would you come on? And I said, sure. They get me in the green room and they say, I think that you should know we have no ratings. And I said, don't worry, I'm well aware. And they said,
I'm not sure I really get. I mean, ratings. What do they mean by we don't have ratings? Is it like the ratings in terms of like our ratings, and then they're like, so what they mean is that there might be people who say bad words or something, or that also you might not get bleeped out if you say a bad word. And then the joke here is that they have low ratings in the sense of low viewership. I mean, I'm guessing that's what it's
the
about.
Producer says, so we brought you on and we want you to speak your mind. I said, well, that's good because I don't really do anything else. And excuse me. And the producer says, also, by the way, I'm a producer. I used to be a producer for Jerry Springer. It was at that point I should have had second thoughts about this whole enterprise. But I instead said, okay, and we get out there, they put me on set, and it's me, and there's 3 people next to me, and then there's 3 people on the panel, if I recall correctly. There's 6 people total. So it's me against 6 leftists, which makes it almost fair for them. And,
Okay.
and they start the debate, and the debate is Caitlyn Jenner just a regular hero or a superhero, right? Can Caitlyn Jenner actually fly? Does Caitlyn Jenner, should Caitlyn Jenner be given a Medal of Honor, or actually should we reserve an honorary spot in Arlington National Cemetery for his heroism? So,
So notice how he intentionally said his. I was waiting for that. I was wondering what pronoun he's used. And so, yeah. Um, I, I like adding these new pronouns is an issue because you got to learn them, and it's sort of like how are you gonna do that, right? But it's just like I mean, of course you can, but the thing is that then you got to even know which one to use for who, so that complicates things. But I mean, if somebody, I mean, we already know the pronouns he or her, right? And now this person is presenting as female. I really don't see why one couldn't call that person her, especially since some people are like literally biologically hermaphroditic already. Anyway, like literally, some of their cells have a Y chromosome and some don't.